So my name is Ray Budavari. I am a longtime member of the NSX product team for over 10 years now. So I'm excited to share and present to the Tech Field Day audience again at VMware Explore and describe really the next step in our networking and security virtualization journey, which is NSX Plus. So this is our multi-cloud security analytics solution, which simplifies, automates, and enhances multi-cloud security. So I have a short presentation for context, but certainly the most exciting part is a demonstration of exactly how we deliver on the capabilities that we're promising in the session title. All right, so just, as a small level set, you've obviously heard today NSX Intelligence is one of the 5 cloud services that we're launched at Explore. And where it fits is it's really focused on end-to-end visibility and enabling multi-cloud security controls. So at a high level, NSX Intelligence leverages the unique architecture of NSX, right? The fact that we have VM kernel or hypervisor level access to every ESX hypervisor in the environment to implement a distributed analytics solution that turns every endpoint prepared with NSX into a data source that securely streams rich network and workload context to a cloud-hosted data platform. So this gives us kind of a foundation of historical data. And because it's obviously built on NSX and our distributed architecture, we're able to do some interesting things like optimize all of the data at the source and build what we believe is quite a differentiated and more efficient analytic solution, right? We don't rely on centrally collecting data to analyze. We don't need to perform sampling. There's no agents required, and there are no blind spots because NSX is everywhere. And once we build this data platform, right, we're able to leverage analytics, codify a lot of the knowledge and experience we have at VMware about what an effective security policy should look like into artificial intelligence and machine learning logic to provide that deep multi-cloud security visibility, firewall policy automation, and threat analytics. Importantly, with NSX Plus, today we're supporting multiple private clouds or on-premises data centers. But in future releases, we'll be expanding to support all of the VMware-powered cloud providers from our many partners and also native public clouds. One of the things I like about this space with analytics is while it really fits, like I said, that distributed architecture of NSX, we also saw a lot of limitations in how our customers were doing analytics. With the traditional approaches that relied on a very heavyweight centralized architecture, either managing a huge number of agents or endpoints, or the limited context that trying to do analytics based on network information, 5-tuple IP fix type data only, that resulted in high footprint and relatively low fidelity in the security controls. All right, I've included one slide on why we need NSX Plus Intelligence, because as I said, I think it's important to understand what we're delivering. But one of our missions in the NSX team is to really enable customers with effective east-west security controls to secure their environments, right? We also need to provide the same enterprise-grade security controls as workloads start to run on different platforms in different physical locations that customers may be managing or may not, or maybe providers are managing. We've also heard for a long time now that a lack of visibility, maybe communication between different teams and departments at customers can make implementing and getting the most value out of microsegmentation challenging. So moving from what has also traditionally been a model of perimeter-based security controls at the edge to now, having policy enforcement at every single workload can be a big step without the right tooling and visibility. So now I'm going to cover the features of NSX Intelligence, and certainly my goal is to let the demonstration do most of the talking, but a bit of context helps what we're going to see. So I mentioned that we have this data platform for NSX Plus Intelligence. It stores a complete record of every flow. It also leverages the deep packet inspection that NSX does in the hypervisor to discover app IDs, URLs, user, file, and process information. So it's much richer context than just, network flows. And having this historical data allows us to do some, what I think are really compelling security use cases. So we're able to correlate all of this workload inventory and configuration data to provide deep visibility into security posture, because seeing what you need to protect is the first step. Then we can discover applications based on their communication patterns, and also provide and automate creating NSX security rules and groups and services based on what we observe using that distributed analytics engine. So if I can kind of summarize here, basically we can automate and make it easier to use the NSX distributed firewall and advanced security capabilities of NSX by aggregating information across DFW, IDS, IPS, NDR, and more of the NSX security stack to provide a full view of our security posture.
Would this be also then, so let's say someone's in a traditional infrastructure, they don't have any NSX, would this be a good first step to gain visibility in the environment, understand how to write those policies and how to implement NSX in an easier way?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good question. I mean, the goal for us there, so we have various tools at VMware. We can start with just collecting IP fix data, providing visibility into what traffic we need to secure. Then you'll see in the demonstration, once you deploy NSX, we can essentially run it in a learning mode, not doing policy enforcement, collect data, and then create these recommendations. So that's actually how a lot of customers use this on premises, is to learn, right, and then test and then push the policy. So it really reduces the time to value for getting the security. Okay, so NSX Plus Intelligence provides visualization of all NSX inventory and flows at scale across multiple sites and clouds. So this gives us visibility into all of the communication. Like I said, I'm stressing this point because it really is unique to NSX. It's deep or rich workload context, right? It's not just flow data, but we have a secure memory channel into the hypervisor that allows us to collect, much richer user, file, process, application information. So the policies we build are very granular. Another point that I can't really do justice in this short session is that we've also invested very heavily in optimizing our user interface for performance and user experience. I think a lot of you are experienced operators. You know that anytime you're visualizing large amounts of data in a topology or connection view, it's hard to scale, right? The number of connections and workloads means the view just increases exponentially. And what happens then is it causes problems scaling, right? So the overhead of computing the view becomes higher, the response time gets worse, and then the user starts to lose context, right? It's no longer, meaningful or readable. So we have innovated a lot in this area, in NSX Plus Intelligence. Basically, we apply a multi-level approach to presenting the data. So we basically move a lot of the computation to the back end instead of the client by running different algorithms like community detection and controlling the amount of data that's displayed. We also do things like seamlessly transition between different views in a hierarchical UI. We do multi-view visualization and many other optimizations. So I guess my key takeaway here is it's not only is it important to collect all of the context and data, but how you present it in a meaningful way, is the other huge part of the problem. So now the NSX Plus Intelligence Recommendation Engine is really what provides the magic of automated NSX firewall policy for security rules, groups, and services. Like I mentioned before, this really reduces the time to value for NSX policy and microsegmentation for our customers. So it allows us to discover and automate the policy. Like I mentioned, right, I've been doing network virtual and security virtualization for over 10 years at VMware. It's a huge focus for us. So we know a lot about microsegmentation, and this allows us to include the knowledge in our product so that any rules that we generate automatically follow best practices for scaling and security. And like I said, you'll see this, hopefully this is the key point of my demonstration. And then the last thing I'll touch upon briefly as a follow-in to the next session on network detection and response is a feature called network traffic analysis. This relies on the data platform in intelligence to provide AI and ML-based detection of suspicious or anomalous network behaviors. So with that historical data that we collect, we're able to build a baseline of what normal security behavior looks like in a customer's environment. And then if any of you kind of know about machine learning, there's two different, well, technically there's three, but there's two that we mainly use, different models to detect threats. So the first is unsupervised machine learning when data hasn't been categorized. It enables us to immediately detect things that look like anomalies, but given that every anomaly is not necessarily a threat, once we've categorized data, we can then run supervised machine learning. So based on training all of that we do based on those data sets to allow us to identify what are real threats and significantly reduce the false positives, which is one of the other problems that traditional solutions have without the same level of context that NSX has. Of course, we provide this detection everywhere in the network because we're distributed, so there's no need for taps, hairpinning, or changing your network topology because NSX runs everywhere. And the way this works, we have built a number of security detectors aligned to the MITRE ATT&CK framework to discover, like I said, either unsupervised or supervised threats. So things like workloads uploading or downloading unusually large amounts of data, things like DNS tunneling, where it looks like legitimate traffic, threats are being tunneled over what looks like legitimate ports, domain generation, where we're accessing suspicious URLs, port scanning, port sweeping, and many more, right? We've built all of this into the product. And the way I like to describe it is policy recommendation helps you build the best firewall policy possible. But there's no such thing as a perfect firewall, even though we think ours is the best. And so firewall policy is a reactive approach, right? You build a great policy and you try to limit movement, lateral movement, and have very granular security controls. Whereas network traffic analysis is a proactive model that actually discovers threats and allows you to proactively respond to them as well. All right, with that, I did say I would let the demonstration do most of the talking, so we're going to cut over to that. Okay. All right, so first you can see that this is the VMware Cloud Services portal, the same place where VMware delivers all of our software that's delivered as a cloud service. Right, I have my environment here. You can see we have services for obviously vSphere Plus, NSX Plus, and of course, I'm going to jump straight to NSX because that's my world, right? And what we can see here is an environment with an NSX instance for intelligence with two on-premises data centers that are connected, right? I'm actually going to switch to the list view, right? And then give you a closer view of our two environments. Now, the reason why I show you this, so this is firstly a view of the local NSX manager that's running, and in fact the inventory, the workloads that are, the hypervisors that are prepared for NSX and our edge nodes. It allows me to make an important point about the NSX Plus services, right? And that is that the data plane, the policy enforcement remains on premises, will always continue to function. The services that we're providing in cloud complement that. So we're really complementing everything that we've built in NSX with these new services. Obviously, I have a subscription as well to NSX Plus. And then if I drill into the instance, this is where we can start to see the really compelling features, right? So firstly, we give you a summary, right? Here I can then go to the visibility and planning. So that's where all of the NSX Plus intelligence features come from. And everyone likes a dashboard. So we built one that gives you an overall view of the security posture, right? It tells us how many of your flows are unprotected, in this case, all of them, and the number of workloads. It gives you a summary of, flow trends and traffic, right? Also, I'm going to give, because there's a technical audience, a little bit of a view on how you configure the environment. I mentioned we do machine learning. So what we're able to do is automatically classify workloads based on whether they're infrastructure or maybe customer workloads. And this allows us to optimize those recommendations we create. So, for example, rather than continually creating the same rules for access to shared services like Active Directory, DNS, we're able to leverage machine learning to create them once. And we also have a number of settings available that control things like data collection, so we can be very granular about which hosts are sending information to NSX Plus Intelligence, what's considered private IP ranges in your environment. But now, I'm going to show you discover and take action, which is where we're actually visualizing all of the traffic flow that's been collected from NSX Intelligence. And what we do, I know it's a little hard to see the colors here, but we categorize all of the traffic in 3 different groups, right? There's unprotected, which means traffic is just hitting a default rule, and basically there's no granular policy applied, blocked or allowed. So it gives you a very quick way of viewing your security posture. Now, what I'm going to do to reinforce actually the good question we had from before is switch to our NSX Local Manager. So this is the on-premises management, right? And what you can see is we have an NSX Manager. It's the same one that I showed you registered in the inventory of the cloud. And here's again, the same cluster, just so you can see. But if we look at the security policy in our distributed firewall, you can see here, right, all we have is the default policy that you get when you prepare NSX. No one has configured anything. So we're essentially allowing any source, destination, and service is permit. I like to describe this, just one sec, as learning mode. So essentially we're in line, we're streaming and collecting all of the information, but we're not restricting any traffic. Pause for the question.
On the node, the management node, does that have to live on premise, or can it be virtual? I mean, not virtualized. I'm sure it can be virtualized, but can it stay in the cloud and not have to be on premise?
Yeah. So the reason we call it local management is that we keep it on premises, and that's required because it actually aggregates all of the flow and workload context, and then it's the only thing that streams to the cloud. So yeah, and look, it's built into our solutions like VCF and deployed on-prem. And so that's an important separation of, analytics and management plane from like the local data plane management. So yeah, we do keep that on-prem intentionally. Okay, and then, we do have the option of deploying NSX Intelligence on premises as well. It would typically show up here in the plan and troubleshoot. But because we're leveraging the cloud service, you can see that it actually tells you that this site is managed by NSX Cloud. So
now, if it were to get cut off from the cloud,
yes,
would you still be able to access the local analytics?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you're cut off from the cloud, the site, we will cache all of the information on the local manager. So we will, there's a period of time where we'll cache and then catch up. The analytics is still available, and the local management, if for whatever reason you needed to recover or change anything, is also still available. So yes, it's a good point. But we do have that disconnected operation. Okay, so what we're going to do now is switch back to NSX Intelligence and show you some of the visualization, right? Basically, in my environment, you can see there are a number of workloads. So I have a CRM application that contains 10 virtual machines in the web tier. But if I click on flow details, I can get very rich detail about real-time traffic flow. I can see, for example, web to app flows on HTTPS. And importantly, this is not just port matching. This is that deep packet inspection I talked about to make sure it actually is HTTPS and not something else. But I can also see web VMs directly communicating with each other, which may or may not be a good thing based on your environment. Generally, they don't need to communicate. And even more worryingly, as I scroll through, I can actually start to see my web VMs initiating connections to external addresses. So those are ones outside the private IP ranges I showed you before for NTP traffic, right? So those are the web VMs. Similarly, I can drill into the application VMs and get a really good view. And this is before we're doing any policy enforcement of what the flows look like, right? Web to app, app to database. I can see how my application is communicating, but quickly get a view of what looks like legitimate traffic and not, right? Again, we discover the actual ports, right? We can see LDAP and DNS traffic to an IP address, which may be a good thing because that's listed as an internal site, right? So like I said, really the first step in building security policy is always visibility, is understanding these traffic flows, right? And then finally here, I'll look at the database servers of my application, right? And here we'll see, again, app to database flows, but actually database flows that are going to a remote IP address, which again, may or may not be a good thing, right? So I also see SSH connections to IP addresses I don't recognize. And again, until you really apply the knowledge you have about the environment, seeing all of the flows is helpful because it really allows you to fine-tune that security policy. So here are my shared services I mentioned before. This is automatically categorized using our machine learning based on these well-known LDAP and DNS.
Before you step away from the screen, it's kind of hard to read, so it may be there and I just don't see it.
Yes.
But is there a way to show how common? So it's been sitting here watching, it's been observing for, let's say we let it run for a month or two, and we see some of these weird things where database is talking external. Do you show how often that happens, or regularity, or are you looking for any sort of patterns around that you can show us?
Yeah, absolutely. We do it. So it is tricky to see. And so thank you for the questions. And if anyone else has them, please do jump in. I'll try to manage the time as best I can. But certainly you can expand this view and you can start to see statistics. You can see, is this recurring? Has this only happening infrequently? There's also a time view here that you can leverage. So the very short answer is yes, we do. In the interest of time, I'm not showing it, but you can expand this and get the exact rule IDs you're hitting, the amount of traffic, the frequency of that traffic as well.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Now, I mentioned there were a number of external flows, so we can tell you exactly what those IP addresses were and what types of traffic are hit. So this is showing us all the servers that are communicating externally. All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to deep dive in. And the reason why I show you this, and I know it's a little hard for everyone to see, but I mentioned we support this hierarchical view that really tells you exactly how your applications are communicating. So if you look at this, I've dived into the application servers, and you can see how they're really the heart of all interconnectivity in this application. All the web VMs talk to the app servers, which are currently talking to DB servers, other internal sites, shared services. But because everything is, obviously the red dashes is unprotected, this is all freely occurring, with no security controls, right? Okay. And then we'll also take a quick look at the compute view. So this allows us to be even more granular. I talked about how hierarchical our UI is, right? We can then look at the actual workload communications, right? So this is inside the app, and this is obviously outside the application. We can click on a workload. We can hover over the flows. We can also right-click on these workloads and then get to that rich workload context I talked about, right? VM information will tell us name, IP addresses, operating system, all these types of information. We can also, if I had more time, I'd show you, right? We also have here process information and user login information that we can display, which is also, and process hash information, which is very useful. But I want to show you the cool stuff. So now that we've kind of shown you, and you can really see now, everything is freely intercommunicating, right? This is what happens when customers have no east-west controls, right? We then have in intelligence this magic wand icon. It really is magic, because when you click this, it starts the recommendations engine, right? And I'm going to start a recommendation here for my application. It's automatically filtered to the workloads that were in the view I just saw. So all my application VMs, web app and database tiers. There's a lot of granularity in terms of how we can create a recommendation, but basically we can start by choosing the time range. We can decide whether we're creating rules for 100% of the traffic, and that's good if you want to jump straight to very granular micro-segmentation, or we can be a little less granular and start with, inter and intergroup only flows. We can also control things like reusing existing groups based on the amount of traffic that we match. So, we've learned how to optimize our rules, exclude flows like bomb traffic that is not useful, the broadcast, unknown unicast, multicast traffic. Once we start discovery, what's happening is we're creating that recommendation job, right? NSX Intelligence is now analyzing all the historical data. It is going to run its processing, and then if everything works, it will, so it starts discovering. At this point, we're running those AI and ML algorithms, right? Once this finishes, right, what happens, it's performing analysis, right? The recommendation here now becomes a link that you can click on, right? It's ready to publish. So we're able to now view the rules groups that NSX Intelligence has automatically recommended. Okay, I think I'll have to speed up a tiny bit, but we can now see, right, these are the minimal required communication required for this application. So we can essentially see here rules that are needed for, because I created a allow list, that means that all other traffic that's not permitted here will be denied. And I've created a rule set that enables the minimal required communication for this application to flow. All right, so what we're going to do is skip forward a little bit. We're going to then click publish, which is the magic button that takes this these automatically generated rules, pushes them to the NSX distributed firewall. So if I actually go back to my on-prem manager, look at distributed firewall, I can see a new section that was created through automation, which is, again, matches exactly what we saw in intelligence. We can fine-tune those rules before we publish them if we want to. The app connectivity strategy is important because it's basically that default drop that we selected. So this implements the granular micro-segmentation. And then the last part of my demonstration, I promise I'm finishing soon, is to go back and show you now the kind of closing the loop and saying we push the policy. Now you need to see what it's actually doing, right? And here you can now see, instead of all those red unprotected flows, we're now seeing traffic that's being allowed or blocked based on the required firewall policy. So this is how easy it is to go from NSX Intelligence recommendations to effective security policy, right? And then the last thing I want to show you is, because we all like to see reports, is going back to the dashboard where we were 100% unprotected. We're now have 0% of our workloads that are unprotected. So we've secured the environment in a matter of minutes. So with that, I am going to wrap up just by summarizing the key benefits of NSX Intelligence. So obviously, we have enabled an analytics and visibility solution across multiple clouds. We've enabled simplified delivery as a service from VMware. And when we combine it with the other NSX cloud services you've seen, right, we enable comprehensive enterprise-grade security controls. All right, with that, thank you all very much. If I have time for questions. Okay, sorry for the bad time management.
The demo was a little fast, but want to know the rules created by automation and what is created manually. Is it clearly visible?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we create a new section in our distributed firewall, clearly label it as a intelligence created policy, and we actually protect it so that it's not user modifiable. So yeah, essentially we organize the rules. Like I mentioned, we kind of follow the best practices so that way you can continue to manage rules independently. If you need to, for example, you might create environment or infrastructure rules that are more high level, and then have the more application aware rules being managed by intelligence.